Yeah, hey folks. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining online. Um, Obviously, we know we like to have a little fun with this kind of stuff, and we're going to have some fun today just talking about what does it mean to try to get business value of IoT. Um, Clearblade, CTO at Clearblade, co-founder there. We've been at IoT since 2013. And there's some things we've learned, and there's some things that we just continue to see over and over. And we keep wondering, how do we unlock this? How do we get moving? And then obviously there's technologies that sit behind all this, but where do we put the technology away and get to business value? Having been at this for a lot of years, I've become the kind of person that walks around, and while everybody else looks at the pretty pictures or the pretty skylines, pretty meals being created, I'm looking at the fancy machine in the corner wondering, I wonder where this data goes, right? That's kind of where my world lives, and you see it everywhere you look. I don't know if you noticed this, but you walk behind a school and you'll find crazy pieces of equipment doing something that somebody probably wishes they knew they were working, right? They know there's giant chillers, that maybe there's a single system of running some SCADA stuff and an HMI panel with a couple LCDs that are saying a couple things that only some guy who knows that Greek can read. There's pumps somewhere pumping out voltages and pressures and backflow. That sits behind every building, every piece of manufacturing we see. We see it in our homes. We see piles and piles of machines. We all think our homes are smart because we got maybe a cool camera, maybe we got a cool door lock. I went around and looked at just the pieces of, the great things I have at home that were great for me and thought, these things aren't connected. I don't even know what half of them are. I bought the house and I've got a sprinkler system, and what's that doing, right? I'm out there flipping knobs trying to understand what it means when I go back here 7 steps to go forward 4 steps to turn on zone 1 for 15 minutes. Right? This exists around our homes as well. We have data trapped in devices where we look around there. It's not just the industrial world. It is different types of things. And then we see it moving around. Again, this is me. I take pictures. Again, I didn't get the good hamburger I got, but I got this great shot of these avocado-like things that are used to distill into some sort of liquor here in Texas, right? It's pretty cool that there's a thing moving so tall bushes around for alcohol production. You see railroad cars, you see these shipments. In every case, there's piles and piles of things creating data that generally just sits there. It's locked up. It's locked up and it's unavailable for us to understand. Maybe one person has access to it, but ultimately we're finding that our world is still full of trapped data. What do we do about this? The vision of IoT was that we were going to unlock this, right? That was the vision. That's what we were sold 10 years ago, right? There was nothing before that where we weren't getting data. We had, M2M, machine to machine things going on. So why isn't we haven't crossed that chasm in the last 10 years? Right? These products existed to do IoT. That's what we're going to talk about. Why is this data locked, and how do we get past this hump so that all of these things that are sitting in our environments can become unlocked? Here we are. We're trapped, right? We're trapped together. And thanks to the power of AI, we got a great visualization where we get out of this thing too, right? So what we're looking at is how do we do this as a company? And so, if we start to think a little more, let's get deeper, let's go dive into it. We start thinking about who's thought about this. A great report came out from IoT Analytics with Microsoft involved or sponsoring it together. They looked across lots of projects. They looked at back to 2014. What were people's challenges back then? They looked back and said, what are the new challenges? What's changing in the industry? Why is it after all these years of technology that we've seen being built, technology, standards, protocols, new pieces of hardware, why are we having such trouble unlocking this world? Why is it there's still thousands of pieces of data that aren't getting unlocked and made available to the overall environment? I pulled out 3 things out of that report which actually are growing in complexity, becoming the bigger concern, holding back success. The first thing that came up was missing capabilities in IT. I like that it says IT because that suddenly means OT people are off the hook, OT knows how to do this, right? OT knows how to get SCADA and that sort of stuff. It says explicitly our IT doesn't know what to do with it, doesn't know how to put it together, doesn't know how to get to it. I look at the next one, it says cyber threats, and that should be good. That's always important. We talked about it, security yesterday on a panel. I appreciate that, Cole, bringing that up. But ultimately, that's a big inhibitor to the projects. To me, that's a good thing. That actually means we are getting mature. At least we're thinking about that now. But the last one, that to me was the big one, and it is the one that really defines what our challenge is. I loved the presentation this morning at Phoenix Contact. I don't know if you had a chance to take the tour. It was fascinating. All the stuff connected, everything out there. But man, do they doing a lot of work to get something to the end user, right? It is a lot of complexity when you look at it. And I think they stated it well in a lot of ways of the things they're having to do to provide capabilities to the end user. Things are missing. Things are having to be built along the way. So I thought I'd break each one of these down. I'll spend some time in IT. I won't go too deep in cyber threats because ultimately we should spend a month on that, and that's a security issue, but we'll talk a little bit about it. And then we'll dive right into the capabilities because I think, and again, I don't have my arms, I love to wave my arms. I think the capabilities, this is what unlocks it all as we go along, right? We saw these mobile phones became ubiquitous once they became capable for everybody to use, right? Once they became easier to use. So we're going to look at each one of these, and we're going to talk about why are we struggling with unlocking the data. And the first thing that I really struggle with and loathe about our industry is how complex we make it. These are different architectures proposed by different very smart vendors who say very correct things about how to build IoT. And every one of them makes me exhausted to think about if I had to go start from scratch, right? This is not what an end user wants to see when you ask them and tell them IoT's out there. They're not wrong, but this is what comes up first, right? These are correct architectures to bring in tying in machine learning, data persistence, document style data. All of this gets said, but ultimately it is complex. It is complex to hear what Phoenix Contact had to put together to tie different SCADA systems in to stream data all together. And ultimately, each one of these architectures actually is saying the exact same thing, right? I think Barry yesterday did a great job of explaining the pattern's kind of the same. Why are we rebuilding all of these pieces each time? And maybe this is controversial. I know we all have parts in these ecosystems that we want to belong in, so we need them to be parts. But ultimately, we need an architecture that people can grab and use and have the same one that's done over and over. IT is not limited by tools. I would argue that IT is not limited functionally. IT is limited by the complexity of all the low-level pieces of middleware that are out there. Right? I heard this morning there's an MQTT broker in Phoenix Contact that's moving around power meter data. Right? To me, my thing goes, oh, that's a piece of middleware. They're using pub sub, so that means anybody who gets the basic auth token, and again, I don't know how they implement it, but by default, anyone who gets that token will be able to pub sub across the entire set of domains and potentially send data back to the power. We have made it too complex because we've sat too granular on what we want to accomplish. We have to make these architectures more standard. When you say, when they say things are missing in IoT, I think about the IIoT and I think, good grief, we launched a man on the moon. We know how to connect devices, right? Rocket scientists figured this out. The problem is IT is still working on things like printers. And this is my printer, so it's me at home that doesn't know how to connect my printer. But we are still fighting in IT with the basics, right? And so we have to change how we're approaching this to get it back to something that our IT teams can roll out and push out and use the standard patterns for and successfully do that. So when I look at it, ultimately, we need to, one, solve for diversity. We're not going to get a common protocol. MQTT was a great answer. OPC UA is a great answer. All of Modbus is a great answer for things running over TCP. We're not going to get a common one. We're going to have to figure out a way to solve for the diversity. We're going to have to say, this is a point of diversity, we're all going to work together and bring it in one place. We need a standard architecture. In all honesty, these clouds are the same, right? They've made different solutions, right? Somehow they've changed MTLS versus asynchronous key off versus OAuth for how the device is. But in the end, it's an authentication pattern that needs to be the same. In a security model, we know what role-based access is. Why do we have 5 different ways to do IAM for an IoT solution, which is devices connecting, sending credentials, sending data over accounts to others? We need a standard architecture to get rid of all those boxes. Whether you pay for them by one along the way or the models, but you've got to have a common architecture that's easier. And then we have to be able to use that to unlock the enterprise side. I think when you thought about the challenge that you saw with IT sort of knows how to get that SCADA data, right? Modbus is something that we can convert and get in and we can turn it in, but it's still not tying back to our enterprise. So when people say our IT is not able to have the tools, I see that they're not able to plug it back in. There's been great conversations. And again, I was inspired by the thing from Phoenix Contact this morning of how are they putting that data back to work? How are they turning on and off the other systems? And even those were still OT systems, but how are they getting that data back? We have to think about this as an unlocking across the enterprise exercise, not just one protocol at a time, not just one SCADA system at a time, not just one smart device from a product out there. And in my mind, when I talk about this, and again, I try to remove the clear blade hat when I talk about this as architecture, in the end, we've got a bunch of stuff out there. We know what the edge is. The stuff's going to talk to these devices. That's where we're going to bring it all together. You've got a Modbus device with a different set of tags and registers that might get done, OPC/UA, Bluetooth. Bring it together. Send it to the cloud. Guess what? We know what IoT looks like. Data streams in, data goes out. Why are we overcomplicating that each time? We know a good protocol for it, but the protocol is not what matters here. It's the fact that we bring that data in and we put the security, and then we go back and we serve 2 stakeholders, the business and the users, right? Let's simplify this. This is what we need to be getting towards and bringing a common view of how we're doing this together. We have a famous saying in Clearblade is we got to stop the science experiments. Science experiments are what we're full of doing here, right? And it's how we understand and figure it out. But we got to get to, let's make this extremely repeatable, extremely standard, and let's make these things work together. I love working with SAS. They talked yesterday because we have a common view of it's not about can I ship a protocol and a data payload to them and then they do their stuff and then back and forth. We need the tools to work together, right? We need the user experience to work together at the higher level. So while we may be doing all those boxes behind the scenes, what ultimately is getting experienced, what IT is consuming, instead of pieces of middleware they're trying to tie together with integration points, what IT is consuming is a common view of what an IoT platform is. And we'll keep going. So then the next thing is we get inability to tackle cyber threats. This was the next inhibitor that sits in front of us. And again, this is a big topic. There's 2 challenges they called out specifically. They need to figure out how to store data and the capacity. To me, that probably means they need to figure out how to securely store the data. The next thing they said is data access management. I guess that's true. I see even more risk in the protocol access. Really, it's the fact that these protocols, we called out, just because it's MQTT, you've got to put TLS, you've got to put basic auth. Ideally, you put role permissions around it. Ultimately, we have to change from these pieces of middleware that you go and figure out how to use securely to a common pattern that implements these security practices, right? I still argue that the fact that we have so many pieces and parts in these architectures is where the security vulnerabilities show up. It is the complexity that we've made IoT is the reason why we have vulnerabilities. The fact that you have to go and add authentication, authorization after the fact is where the risk comes. And I did a whole session. I did a master class, I believe we call it here, with talking about this. So if you really want to hear me drone on and on about security, that's where you can find it. But this is where we're trying to get to, right? OT, IT networks, securely putting in all the different capabilities. We go through the fact that there's a distinguishing missing amount of trust, or we don't approach it with a zero trust, so we trust too much very often. But ultimately, a secure network means we are managing the APIs, we are forcing authentication, we are forcing authorization at a role level down to individual actions, individual topics. We are putting in the ability to protect bad actors. We assume that our edge environments might become compromised and try to attack us even though they're in our own networks. We put in the ability to update OTA, over-the-air updates, so we don't have to drive every vehicle, every machine back into the factory to put a USB stick in it to update it. We know how to do those processes. We build them in. And then we do things like we work with the existing architectures. The Purdue model, something that to this day still makes up, right? We can't just throw that out because it's inconvenient when we want to put a SIM card in and get to the internet. So ultimately, we have to bring in these capabilities into that standard architecture and not letting each piece get built individually each time. The last one is the missing capability for end users. And I thought this was interesting. Again, I find it fascinating that it bubbled up and that it shows up. And really what they're saying is it's the shortage of in-house expertise and then upskilling the users. Man, what experts we had here this morning, right? I mean, those folks knew. I mean, you could ask them right now, where's the data flowing, right? It takes experts today to do IoT. And Phoenix Contact has a ton of these experts, but it is hard to get all of those people in all the places we want IoT to go. There's no doubt in my mind we're going to have 100x more connected devices in the next 10 years, maybe more than that, right? We see it happening around us. How are we going to get all of the experts to actually connect these things if it takes someone to understand each MQTT broker, each topic, each API, each action taken to send a text message, right? There's too many pieces and parts for the in-house people to build this stuff. And then it's upskilling the workforce. And I thought a lot about that one. I'm like, why is it so hard to get someone who looks at a pump in real life to look at a pump digitally, right? What does that mean? Why is it so hard for those folks? And it hit me, are we giving them the right views, right? I think the fact that this was an IT problem was interesting because I feel like SCADA systems have been showing us what to do for a long time, and we've been able to train pretty well around that. And that's because when you go to a SCADA system and you look at the pump, it's literally a pump, and you run into the water level inside the tank, you literally see the water level inside the tank, right? We know how to interact with those systems. And there's some esoteric behaviors and hex codes and junk you send to those too, which makes them hard. But ultimately, evidently, what we're building as IoT solutions is too hard to use and too hard to adopt, right? Now, there's culture and other things that go behind that. But I got to believe everyone's figured out how to use Instagram and TikTok. We didn't have to go and train the users for that, right? It was adopted because it was easier to use, right? The workforce in the end is quite skilled if you can get them the information they need in a way that they can consume and learn themselves. And so I'll be a little controversial here because I'm kind of opinionated. We need to quit giving these people developer tools. I'm a nerd, I'm a developer, that's my background. I like writing code. It's actually something fun to do on the weekends. Instead of building PowerPoints like these, I'd rather write code. The question is that's not how everybody needs to use this. And yet everywhere I look, I see tools that were created 10 years ago for nerds like me, and we're trying to give them to end users. And I think that's a problem. I think that's a complexity. We're assuming some assumption about how people want to use it, and that's how we need to change it. I love NiFi. What a great project by Apache. I love Node-RED. I remember sitting in a room 10 years ago with the Node-RED creator debating how do we tie MQTT together and make sure two brokers know how to talk to each other. Great tools. This is a tool for a nerd, or sorry, don't hurt your feelings. This is a tool for a developer, right? This is a tool that requires somebody go in, and I did have a few things I could read on here. I can't read it up here. But this is to know these attributes, to know these names, to tie this together, to put in the action workflow. This is too hard, right? This is the tool we're giving to end users today and telling them, go do IoT. We made it easy. Great tool. I would say it's not an end user tool. Grafana, I love the tool. How pretty is that, right? I see Grafana everywhere I go. It's a great tool. I use it internally. I watch servers. I watch CPU metrics. I see connections happen. This is a pretty tool. It looks like something for end users. And yet, I regularly am finding myself trying to remember how to write the PromQL to query not just total connections, but look connections by system key, or do all of these random things. And I'm writing code again in this tool. Right? So maybe I can give one static dashboard that works, but we're giving them developer tools. This was a tool built for developers. I believe that we're not serving the end user in their language, nor are we giving them a tool they can get enabled on that makes sense for them. So we're giving them our developer tools, our DevOps tools, and telling them to figure it out. Right? We have to start thinking of this whole IoT industry. If we're going to unlock this data, we're going to give it to people in a way that they can consume it. We have to start thinking of it. And I think Barry was the one that says he hates the term digital twins. I don't love it either. I appreciate the guy yesterday called it an operational digital twin, because that's what I'm after. Everything else is video games from my perspective. An operational digital twin gives me real data. It lets me see what's really going on. But we have to get beyond thinking of a digital twin as a technology and get back to thinking of this is just a piece of software, right? We don't go and think about how are we going to do our enterprise resource planning software and then think about what database we're going to buy. We don't think about what streaming engine I'm going to use to build my ERP. We need to start thinking about what are my resources and what are the attributes of my resources I care about? What are my things and what do I care about? We need to move the whole conversation of IoT up to the business value. Here you can see everything is exposed back to what is a water levels and things that matter to the operator here of what they want to look at. This is what IoT is trying to achieve. If you were to build a Grafana board, ultimately, rather than a lot of the levels you see, they want these things in the green sections that mean the dioxide is the right levels in this particular pond. I think this slide built on me and I wasn't expecting it. So similarly, right, we saw some great graphs yesterday of looking at the solar panel. I believe it was the inverters pulling off the energy across time. Beautiful graph showed across, right? That should be the out-of-the-box experience, and I believe it was, right, in that use case, but give people the views that make sense and let them be able to customize it along the way. We should look at it in terms of the same way CRMs look at the world. We don't go and build our own customer relationship management tool, right? Now we have Salesforce or HubSpot or one of the other ones out there that we might use. IoT should be the same way. These digital twins should be the same way. It should be we just simply come in and define what matters to me. Where's my customer? A customer on an aisle, right? It's just an attribute. It's not about the fact that I did video processing. It's not about the fact that I did the video analytics. It's all about just where are people standing in my store and how does that relate to the overall business value. We need to think about it the same way we think about our businesses and our BMS systems, right? Ultimately, BMS systems are quite complex, but the people who use them know how to use them, and they take that data. And we need IoT just to approach this from a perspective of a common way to use it and not a whole set of different things that have to get built each time. Whether you use the world from an enterprise asset management system, whether you use it from a BMS, whether you use it from an ERP, this is how we need to approach IoT, or we're always going to live in this science experiment world. With that, oh, it didn't work. This should get you free, right? Ultimately, the goal is to free yourself, right, from what is ultimately the trap, the data lock that we experience. Hope that was interesting. Thank you for having me today. Any questions?